Hi, welcome. It's been a couple of days since I posted a video, and I've been reading through Matthew chapters 24, 25, and these are kind of subjects that I like to spend a bit more time on and not rush into. They're a bit meatier, maybe a bit more tricky to you want to hear what God's saying through them, and particularly chapter 24, which I'm going to look at today, is looking at the kind of signs of the end times, and then 25 is about how we prepare for that. So at the beginning of 24, Jesus, they're in the temple, and the disciples kind of look at the temple and say, kind of, isn't this lovely, wonderful? And then Jesus kind of prompts this conversation by saying, these bricks, these stones are going to be thrown down. There won't be one built upon each other. And then later on, when they're alone, the disciples come to him and ask him questions. I think it's, when we're trying to understand what this passage talks about, I do think it's worth highlighting that, first of all, the disciples, I think, ask three questions. And this is in 24 verse 3. They say, tell us, when will these things be? So that's one question, if they're thinking about the stones in the temple. And then they say, what will be the sign of your coming? So that's the second question. And of the end of the age. Because, again, we don't want to assume that all those things are the same thing. That the temple and Jesus coming and the end of the age aren't necessarily the same thing. They might be, but we can't assume it. So we need to look into that further. I think as we look through this as well, so that a lot of this is around prophecy. And one of the things about prophecy is it's never cut and dry, it's never simple. And in many respects, often prophecy applies to more than one thing. So when we look at maybe some of the words of David, we see that they were about him or about his situation, but they also referred to messianic prophecies as well. And so they can have twofold meanings. And I think when we even look at some of these things, they had twofold meanings that were kind of imminent and things that those people would experience, but also things for the future as well. And so one of the things he talks about is what aren't the signs of the end, because again, you'll get many people who come and say, and I'll be honest, it irks me a little bit when people say to me, oh, things are really bad at the moment, do you think it's nearly the end? Whereas actually what Jesus says, he says there'll be wars and rumors of wars. He says there'll be famines and earthquakes in various places. But then he says all these are but the beginning of the birth pains. So in a sense, these are not end time events, they are beginning time events. And so when we're seeing, again, the horrendous things that are happening in the world, there's many terrible things, but these aren't the end time things. They are the beginning time things. I think it's also worth recognizing that from the moment of Christ's death, resurrection, it brought in the age of the church. And that age nearly is 2,000 years ago, and is still the same age. And so we're in a period of time, an age, an era. And so when these things are going to happen throughout that time. What he then does say, though, is that there's going to be tribulation and persecution for the church. So if we think about what that meant for the early believers, they were severely persecuted. They were thrown to the lions. They were used as human torches. They were terribly persecuted. And throughout history, there have been Christians who have been terribly persecuted for their beliefs. And again, I think part of that is, I don't think it was a specific time necessarily, but it's kind of in this age, the church is going to be persecuted. We should expect persecution, and we need to endure till the end. And that's what Jesus commends for us. Then he goes to speak about, and he says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And so again, he's talking about something that's going to happen. I think this is where he's referring particularly to the throwing down of the temple. And if you don't know, when the Romans came in 70 AD, They basically destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple. I don't know if there's anything particularly about them putting something in the temple, but almost the fact that they were in the temple. They kind of desecrated the temple by their presence in that. And really, ever since, there's been that desecration of that holy space for the Jewish nation. It's not been the same as it was. And so, in that sense, I think there was an event, and again, they had to flee Jerusalem. They had to flee and get away from the Romans. But we also see how the Jews have been kind of decimated around the world, and actually the coming back to Jerusalem is part of God's purpose for the Jews that hopefully we're seeing the fulfillment of now as part of that. Something Jesus also talks about is false Christs. He says there will be those who come who say, I am the Christ, and they will lead people astray. And even in my time, there's been people who say, I am the Christ, I am Jesus. And we need to be wary of that. And I think one thing that again Jesus goes on to say, because then he talks about, well, how will you know it's me, really? And in verse 30, he says, then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And I think Jesus is saying, look, when I come back, you're going to know it's me. It's not just someone who's saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, even if they're showing miracles, power, things like that. No, when I come back, it's going to be undisputable. There's going to be nothing like it. And so I think there's a warning for us there that we need to watch out. He also then says, because it's interesting, it kind of talks about these things that happen. Again, he says the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give light and the stars will fall from heaven and the powers of heaven will be shaken. I don't know if that's literal or if it's metaphorical. But again, these things are going to happen. But then he says, but then no one knows when this is going to happen. So again, we don't know when this is going to happen. And I find it interesting, he then says, but he'll also come a bit like a thief in the night. That they'll come and suddenly one will be taken, one will be left. And part of me feels that, because there's a warning here, it says in those days it's a bit like Noah. And Noah in that time, there was a lot of build-up, there was a lot of preparation. He was building this boat for a long time, telling people this flood is coming, and they were just ignoring him. And again, we can be giving the warning of Christ's second coming, and people will just ignore us and carrying on as they were. And in some respects, it feels like it's one of those things you can see it coming, but at the same time, when it comes, you're going to be surprised. And that's what we go on after this. And so again, with Noah, they ignored him, but then one day the rain came and it was too late for them. And one day Christ will come, and maybe even there will be signs of shaking of heavens and sun darkened, and we'll be the ones saying, you know, guys, I think this is a time, let you know Christ is coming. And people will be like, it's okay, we got time, or it's nothing, it's this or that, and they'll then be caught out. And so I think to summarize, one of the things we kind of need to make sure we're not worried about is, again, all these signs, rumors of wars, all that thing. These are part of just life in a sense, and even the persecution. But what we will see is those heaven, in a sense, the heavens shaken. But what we're really looking for is the return of Christ in the clouds. And when he comes, and you can read about this in the book of Revelation, there'll be no mistaking that it is him. And this is the day we look for. Now, following that, and going into chapter 25, it talks about how we as the church prepare for that, how we make ourselves ready. But that is a different video. So I look forward to seeing you in that one.